Good morning, everyone. It's Monday, April 18th, 2022 at 7:53 a.m. my time. And, you know, the nature and the magnitude of the story that we have unfolded is the centerpiece of literally everything that no one understands. You all have to understand that the world that you live in is not what you think it is. So, over and over and over, I observe online from a handful of independent, I might refer to them as entertainers, people who kind of give their spin and react to things that are happening in the world that are somewhat of a reaction to media, what we might call the 24-hour cycle, that we all have an opinion of, that we're all trying to navigate our lives through to try to get some sort of semblance or orientation to make sense of a world that sometimes doesn't make sense. But the problem is we all have our instinct, or I should say the solution. That is the solution, because everybody knows the system is corrupt. Everybody knows the system is rigged, but again, they don't understand how it is. That's why I had to make the con with my team. It didn't make sense. So I started pulling the thread, and then one thing led to another, and I started piecing the pieces of the puzzle together to be able to formulate the full picture. And the full picture is something that, for example, when I was looking at the headlines this morning, everybody talks about in the periphery, but nobody has ever presented the entirety of the story. And what is it? It's corruption. Everything I'm looking at, whether it's campaign donations for Trump, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's something that's involving the economy, all of these things are part and parcel to the actual way the mechanism or the machine works. So we have to kind of look at it, and I have to try to bring this to you every day from a system or from a perspective that influences your life, so you actually understand why corruption is something that you have to step up to participate in. Because if we, the citizens, do not step up to take control of our government, which means elevate elected officials to get into positions of power to operate an actual agenda on behalf of you and me and everyone you see, there's no chance to change this game. Because the way the game is played is it's inside pool, okay? And it's backroom negotiations. And guess what? That's always been the way it's been. But here's the problem with now. We have been in a nonstop economic circus of corruption going back to the great financial crisis of 2008. And what created that absolute global meltdown is pretty much on display now. Okay? And what's the most important aspect or the corollaries between 13 years ago and today? If you look at the time period between 2004, 5, 6, and 7, it was all premised on credit. Most people were rolling over credit. They had more debt. They had maybe a little bit of increasing, at least on its face, revenue. I know that I happen to work for a television show that was giving away houses, and so the source of the income for this television show was an executive producing, I should say, a commercial and a residential developer out of the Northwest, and their income was derived from selling mortgages, okay? Or, creating commercial projects or whatever, but all based on debt, okay? And so we have a Federal Reserve policy that in the wake of the 2008 great financial crisis, when everything came unglued, when the wheels fell off of the car, when we created this train wreck, this absolute calamity, it was because we just kept pushing the envelope on debt and debt and debt until there was nowhere to go, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. And one of the key indicators at that time, quite frankly, was the cost of gas. You see a corollary? We have incredible increase of cost of gas. And you can kind of understand it from the sense of the producers, right? They were sitting on the sidelines with COVID. I think we saw like a reduction of gas usage by incredible numbers, nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime because of COVID. And it literally, I think, reduced the carbon emissions output of this, global fossil fuel machine by something like 20%. It was absolutely incredible. There were cities in China that you could actually see the sky for the first time in decades, that sort of thing. But now, we're starting to get back to people being at work and the way things work and so on and so forth. So the cost of gas is skyrocketing, not to mention, of course, the war in the Ukraine. And all of that has a supply chain effect. And ultimately, it's one of those things where it's like when you pay more for gas, you have less money for groceries. You have less money for other entertainment or things that you want to do with your family. and the whole thing gets choked down the pipeline. As does, quite frankly, the increase in cost for everything. Of course, that comes from inflation. Now, inflation is coming from a couple of different factors. They're coming primarily from supply chain issues, and also because we have a handful of corporate, institutions in every single category that have basically monopoly power. So, as in the oil metaphor or analogy, they are, increasing their prices to see how much we're willing to pay because they're making up for lost ground from a couple of years ago, quite frankly, in the COVID madness and that sort of thing. But everything is on hyperdrive, but it's all fueled by monetary policy. So going back to 2009, after the great financial crisis, everybody kept saying it's a problem of liquidity. Liquidity means, literally money in the bank, money to be able to lend, money to get into the companies to be able to pay their employees, purchase the goods, so on and so forth. And unlike most corporations or companies, banks, they don't have to pay for the raw materials. So like if you're a car manufacturer, you've got steel, you've got the electronics, you've got all of the things that are a part of the actual ultimate unit that we're purchasing. All of those cost money. But in the case of banks, if the Federal Reserve provides 0% interest, that money is their raw material to be able to loan out. And bankers make money on fees packaging deals. Now, if you're dealing with asset manager, private equity, or hedge funds, or any of those sort of intermediaries, and I believe I said asset managers up front, they have a systemology that's on display, for example, in our work, The Con, www.thecon.tv. And in our case, what I had to do is I had to figure out the entirety of the pipeline of the housing industry that led to the collapse, that buried me to get to the point that I was asking the whole time, which was, wait a second, this doesn't make sense, because I was going through this foreclosure process, dealing with these intermediaries called servicers, and servicers work with foreclosure mills. It's on display in the Con. It gets more involved if we get into season 2, which is a big if right now, because we've got to find a market of people who actually want to see this stuff. But I know that there's millions of you out there, possibly tens of millions. But most of us are on this gerbil wheel, right? We keep spinning. We keep trying to keep up with what's going on, with the ebbs and flows of things that have been going on, quite frankly, since 2009. And where has it led us? It's led us to this situation, which, again, we're on the precipice of another, what they call the recession. But the recession for the entire economy means the Great Depression for most of you. I know, because I actually lived it. What does it mean for me when I went through this process? Well, I lost my income first and foremost. Then I had to work 2 jobs apiece to try to keep up with the bills, which include a modified mortgage at that time, which never got modified because I was dealing with a criminal syndicate. Then I ultimately lost an asset, what could have been my ticket to the middle class had I been able to hold on to it. And of course, had I been able to hold on to it, given all of the increase in real estate ever since, I would have never made the Con. I would have probably sold my house and then bought another house and so on and so forth and just been part of the system. And maybe I even would have switched careers. Who knows, right? But the long and the short of it is, I've just got this insatiable curiosity, and I've got this foundation and this premise that I believe in democracy. I believe in the integrity of law. I believe in common sense. I believe in this notion of dynamism, where everybody who is very worthy at whatever their skill may be. Doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur and you happen to be a developer and you can put things together. That's fantastic. If you're somebody who's a carpenter and you get work because of all of this growth and you're really good at what you do, kudos to you. Athlete, whatever the type of career is, doctor, it doesn't matter. But I want, if you understand the system, you understand that if we have, kind of these fundamentals of democratic sort of economics, where things are spread out, where they're not monopolized, where they're not centralized, then there's more opportunity for growth, more opportunity to, quite frankly, fail too, but it's regional. So it doesn't have this global kind of contagion, given what we've created in the United States, and quite frankly, the world, post-2009. Just more and more power is centralized in fewer and fewer hands, and you get to this point, like, for example, over the course of the last 13 years, the financial industry is a criminal operation. It literally is. It is on one hand because of the smoke and mirrors of things that I keep trying to tell you, but they're also laundering money for international drug lords, for cartels, for terrorists, for all sorts of things that undergird what are supposed to be the sort of the mechanics of, you're supposed to have buffers within banks to be able to loan at whatever kind of ratio, aspect ratio and all that sort of thing, to be able to get liquidity into the system. And so when you go up and up and up the food chain, You get to the top, and the centralized force of the whole thing is the Federal Reserve. Literally, the central bank can print or digitize into existence as much money as it wants to, because we have a sovereign currency, and the United States is also the world's global currency. And because of those two specific advantages, we can digitize trillions of dollars into the system to put into this whole network. But we've created, over the course of 4 decades, a neoliberal financialized structure, which is globalism, okay? So when we hear like CEOs of BlackRock, Larry Fink, talk about, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine being a major challenge to globalism, I mean, that guy's working for, the idea is the new aristocracy, right? It's centralization. It's like, we're the ones who own everything and influence everything. And if you have the money and you can invest with us, you're going to see your share price increase. If you are involved with if you buy assets and they buy it from you, I guess you increase your real estate and whatever the case may be. But it's usually equities and real estate that have gone up in this particular bull market. Bull market means an aggressive market for investors for the last 13 years, primarily because of Fed policy. They've injected liquidity and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars into the system, of which these bankers get to pocket the fees, and ultimately banks make money by lending it out. So if banks are making money by lending out to consumers like they did back in the 2008 great financial crisis, and you think of it as supply and demand, basically they were dependent, their futures were aligned with our futures, because if they gave us houses, we want the houses to increase because we've got more income and the value's there, and everybody wins, and that's called a rising tide raises all ships. But here's the problem. They got rid of the golden goose decades ago. So we've been, basically minimizing what we produce in this country to the point that we've, shopped it out and offshored it to, global entities, to where the middlemen, the financiers, ultimately create deals where most of our products are coming from Asia, and most of the time over the course of the last 20 years, our energy is coming from the Middle East. So it's always this balance trying to figure out what makes sense. Well, the only way you have balance of what makes sense is if you have politicians that are in power that are actually working for you, and you have, the Department of Justice and the FBI and the SEC actually doing their job, which is to rein in criminality. None of that is going on. What's going on is a free-for-all of the guys above the line that you might call the professional class ultimately, but when you get higher up the ranks, what you're looking at is this revolving door between Ivy League meritocracy set, and they do smoke and mirrors, and they might look like, they've got this gazillion-dollar, bespoken suit on, but they're just acting as criminals because they understand the black box casino, which is why the system is rigged, but you don't know how it's rigged, and that's why we made the con. www.thecon.tv. Look, at the end of all of this, what you need to understand is they've strangled everything that you think we are. I have to try to get into your head that the legal system does not work in a fair, just manner the way it's designed, okay? They just basically bulldozed millions and millions of people in the aftermath of the great financial crisis with paperwork that did not belong in the courts, but the judges allowed it anyway because they were trying to move it fast, because the banks were paying the states, which were paying the AGs, which ultimately in the legislatures pay the judges. That's how it works, okay? There's a lot more detail, but you don't have all day to listen to me, and I don't have all day to be able to tell you these things, and I want to try to keep it to a minimum. We have to build a movement. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm creating this movement to purge corruption, and that has to be central to everything, because everything you're going to hear from this point forward, leading up to the midterms, it's going to be the Democrats saying, look, we're not Trump. But at the same time, they're the 4 decades of the meritocracy financialized system that created Trump. And those of you who think you're going to vote for Trump because he's an alternative to that, he's just as corrupt and wicked as they are, maybe more so, quite frankly. He's just the bottom of he's the bottom of the barrel, quite frankly. It's a race to the bottom. We're better than this, America. We have to have integrity. We have to have courage, but it has to come from we, the people. If you are a citizen, if you're somebody who cares about this stuff, get off your freaking ass and click share on everything we do. Hashtag everything we do. And join me at YouTube at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. We need millions upon millions, and quite frankly, the most important thing that you have to do is get your head around it. It's called awareness of how the system works, because if you've got the knowledge of how the system works, then you can actually be effective. That's at www.thecon.tv, and ultimately, once you have the details of that, you can come in with us. We can build this this sort of platform, and I'm in the midst of it right now, to where we create something that candidates get hip to, and we start to create as much noise as possible. And it's only going to come from us, because I'll tell you this right now, the independent journalists or the independent media guys or the comedians or everything else, they don't have the information. Nobody knows what's going on. I saw this analyst, this trade analyst who I listen to every day, and the guy's fantastic, but he has a headline that says, $10 billion IMDb scandal, the largest fraud in history. What? No, it's not. And this guy's a smart guy. Ours is, by magnitudes. This guy said $10 billion is the largest fraud in history. This was $29 trillion. Yeah, I think if you put $1 billion on top of each other, it goes to the moon and back halfway. Think about $1 trillion, which is 1,000 billion. That's 29 trillion of those to backstop a criminal enterprise that owns the system. And they continue to do it. 2019, I'm pretty sure the numbers are up to about 23 trillion from what I've seen to backstop the same run in derivatives, quite frankly. You don't know all of that stuff. Some of you do, some of you don't. But the facts are, you don't know what the facts are in the con. Check out the con, join us. So think about all of these different things real quick. Write them down and join us if you want to purge corruption. Send me emails. Send me your stories on our website. You can send stories of what happened to you in the financial crisis. If you want to get involved and become an activist in this movement, please let me know. So go to, on YouTube, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, and then hashtag Exodus, hashtag the resurrection, hashtag truth is marching, hashtag failure is not an option. These are all attitudes to bring the citizenry of the United States together, the upwardly mobile middle class, dynamic people who are competitive, who want to win, who want the country to work up by and for the people, who refuse to allow corruption to destroy us any further. That's my mission. I hope you'll join us. Onwards and upwards.